The cargo freighter Wandering Star moved slowly through the darkness of space, its engines humming with a steady rhythm that had become familiar to everyone aboard over the past 3 weeks of travel. Commander Daniel Hayes stood alone at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, as he watched the massive Corvathi space station grow larger against the backdrop of distant stars. He was 38 years old, with short brown hair that was starting to show traces of gray at the temples, and his blue eyes carried the calm focus of a man who had seen more than his share of difficult situations. The station was enormous, a sprawling structure of dark metal and glowing lights that stretched for several kilometers in every direction. It looked like a fortress, which was exactly what it was. The Corvathi had built it to demonstrate their power, and every species that visited was meant to feel small and insignificant in its shadow. Human aboard the freighter, assigned by the Terran Diplomatic Corps as a liaison for what the Galactic Council had classified as a routine trade negotiation. But Daniel knew there was nothing routine about dealing with the Corvathi. They were an insectoid species, ancient and proud, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with hard exoskeletons that gleamed like polished armor. Their compound eyes could see in spectrums that humans could not even imagine, and their mandibles were strong enough to crush bone with ease. For 3,000 years, they had dominated this sector of the galaxy, viewing most other species as little more than convenient labor or occasional entertainment. Humans were new to the galactic stage, having only achieved faster-than-light travel about 60 years ago. To species like the Corvathi, humanity was barely worth noticing. The freighter captain, a friendly Valaran named Torux, approached Daniel with a concerned expression on his. "Commander Hayes, are you certain you want to do this alone?" Torux asked, his voice carrying the slight hiss that was common to his species. The Corvathi do not have a reputation for being welcoming to species they consider beneath them. Daniel turned from the viewport and offered the captain a small smile. "I appreciate your concern, Torux, but this is what I trained for," he replied. "Besides, showing up with a security team would only make them think we are afraid." Torux's tail twitched nervously. "With respect, Commander, perhaps a little fear would be wise in this situation." Daniel did not argue the point, but he also did not change his mind. He had dealt with dangerous situations before, many times, in places far more hostile than a space station filled with arrogant aliens. Before joining the Diplomatic Corps 5 years ago, Daniel had spent 15 years as a special operations soldier in the Terran Defense Force. He had survived jungle warfare, Arctic deployments, desert combat, and underwater missions. He had tracked enemies across 3 continents and completed operations that most people would consider impossible. The Corvathi might look intimidating, but Daniel had faced worse. The docking procedure took about 20 minutes, and then Daniel gathered his small bag of personal items and made his way to the airlock. He wore his formal diplomatic uniform, a simple dark blue suit with the Earth insignia on the chest, and he carried no weapons. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Daniel stepped onto the Corvathi station for the first time. The first thing he noticed was the smell, a sharp chemical odor mixed with something organic that he could not quite identify. The second thing he noticed was the temperature, which was much warmer than he had expected, probably comfortable for the insectoid Corvathi, but slightly unpleasant for a human. Human. The third thing he noticed was the delegation waiting for him, and the looks of barely concealed contempt on their faces. There were 6 Corvathi in total, all of them towering over Daniel by at least 2 feet. Their exoskeletons were various shades of dark brown and black, and their compound eyes reflected the harsh lighting of the docking bay like clusters of tiny mirrors. At the front of the group stood a particularly large individual, whose exoskeleton was decorated with intricate golden patterns that marked him as someone of high rank. This was High Arbiter Zilkith, the leader of the Corvathi Trade Council and one of the most powerful individuals in this sector of space. Zilkith's mandibles clicked together rapidly as he looked Daniel up and down, and Daniel recognized the sound as the Corvathi equivalent of dismissive laughter. "This is the human representative," Zilkith said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through. Daniel's chest tightened. "They send us a soft-skinned creature from a backwater world to negotiate matters of galactic importance." The other Corvathi joined in the clicking laughter, their antennae twitching with amusement. Daniel kept his expression neutral and his posture relaxed. He had been warned about Corvathi arrogance, and he understood that this display was meant to intimidate him, to establish dominance before the negotiations even began. It was a tactic he had seen many times before, from enemies both human and alien. "I appreciate the warm welcome, High Arbiter," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm and polite. "I look forward to productive negotiations that will benefit both our peoples." Zilketh's compound eyes seemed to focus more intently on Daniel, perhaps surprised that the human had not shown any fear or submission. "You speak with confidence for one so fragile," the High Arbiter observed. "Your species has been traveling among the stars for barely a single generation, yet you come here as if you were our equal." Daniel met the alien's gaze without flinching. "With respect, High Arbiter, equality is not determined by age or appearance," he replied. "It is determined by what one brings to the table." Another round of clicking laughter came from the Corvathi delegation, but Daniel noticed that Zilketh did not join in this time. Pause. Instead, the High Arbiter studied Daniel with what might have been curiosity. "Pause. We shall see what you bring to the table, human," Zilketh said finally. Pause. "We shall see indeed." The delegation turned and began walking toward the interior of the station, clearly expecting Daniel to follow. He did so, keeping his pace steady and his head high. As he walked through the corridors of the massive station, Daniel observed everything around him, with the trained eye of someone who had spent years gathering intelligence in hostile territory. He noted the placement of guards, the layout of the hallways, the locations of exits, and potential cover. It was habit more than necessity, but habits like these had kept him alive through situations that would have killed most people. The Corvathi they passed in the corridors all stopped to stare at Daniel, their compound eyes tracking his movement with undisguised interest. He heard their clicking whispers as he passed, and though he did not understand their language, the tone was clear enough. They thought he was weak, fragile, insignificant. They thought he was prey. Daniel allowed himself a small, private smile. Throughout human history, many enemies had made that same mistake. They looked at humans and saw creatures without natural weapons, without armor, without the physical advantages that so many other species possessed. What they failed to understand was that humans had survived and thrived, not because of what they were born with, but because of what they had learned to become. Daniel had no claws, no fangs, no exoskeleton, but he had something far more dangerous. He had the accumulated knowledge of a species that had spent millions of years turning itself into the most effective predator on a planet full of things that wanted to kill it. The Corvathi did not know this yet, but they would learn. The negotiations began the following morning, in a large chamber near the center of the station. Daniel sat alone on one side of a curved metal table, while High Arbiter Zilketh and 4 other Corvathi officials sat on the opposite side. The room was designed to intimidate, with towering ceilings and harsh lighting that cast deep shadows across the alien faces. Daniel had slept poorly the night before, not because he was nervous, but because the quarters they had given him were designed for Corvathi bodies, and the sleeping platform was hard as stone. Still, he had functioned on less sleep during his military days, and he pushed the fatigue aside as he focused on the task at hand. "Let us begin," Zilketh said, his mandibles clicking with each word. "Earth wishes to establish trade routes through Corvathi-controlled space. And in exchange, you offer what exactly?" Daniel activated the holographic display built into the table, projecting images of Earth's resources and technological capabilities. "We offer access to several rare minerals found in abundance on our colony worlds," he explained. "Additionally, we are prepared to share advances in medical technology that could benefit Corvathi citizens." One of the other officials, a smaller Corvathi with a scarred exoskeleton, made a sound of dismissal. "Your minerals are of low quality compared to what we already possess," the official said. "And your medical technology is primitive by our standards." Daniel had expected this response. The Corvathi were not interested in fair trade, they were interested in dominance. Every proposal he made would be rejected or countered with demands that were wildly unreasonable. "Perhaps we could discuss the specific needs of the Corvathi people," Daniel suggested. "If you tell me what resources or technologies would be most valuable to you, we might find common ground." Forward, his compound eyes glittering in the harsh light. "What we want, human, is exclusive mining rights in the asteroid belt you call the Haven Cluster," he said. "Full access, no restrictions, for a period of 100 standard years." Daniel kept his expression neutral, but internally, he felt a flash of anger. The Haven Cluster was one of humanity's most valuable resources, a collection of mineral-rich asteroids that provided essential materials for ship construction and colony development. Giving the Corvathi exclusive access would cripple human expansion for generations. "That is a significant request," Daniel said carefully. "What would Earth receive in exchange?" "You would receive our continued tolerance of your presence in this sector," Zilketh replied, and the other officials clicked their mandibles in amusement. "Consider it a generous offer." The negotiations continued for 2 more days, and each session followed the same pattern. Daniel would make reasonable proposals, and the Corvathi would reject them with contempt, while demanding more and more concessions from Earth. It was clear that they had no intention of negotiating in good faith. They simply wanted to humiliate the human representative and demonstrate their superiority. On the evening of the 3rd day, Daniel sat alone in the station's common area, reviewing his notes on a small datapad. The room was large and crowded with members of various species, most of whom gave Daniel a wide berth. Apparently word had spread about the human who was foolish enough to challenge the Corvathi at their own negotiating table. He was so focused on his work that he did not notice the group of young Corvathi warriors approaching until they were already standing over him. There were 5 of them, all wearing the distinctive armor of the Corvathi military caste. Their leader was slightly smaller than the others, but carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never been challenged. "Human," the leader said, deliberately using the word as an insult. "I am Vrextal of the warrior caste, and I have questions for you." Daniel looked up from his datapad and met the young warrior's compound eyes. "Ask your questions," he replied calmly. Vrextal's antennae twitched with what might have been surprise at the lack of fear in Daniel's voice. "We have heard that your species considers itself intelligent," Vrextal said. "Yet we have studied your biology and found nothing impressive about you at all." "You have no natural weapons," Vrextal continued. "No claws, no fangs, no venom, no armor to protect your soft skin from harm." He leaned closer, his mandibles spreading in what Daniel recognized as a threatening display. "You are prey animals, pretending to be civilized, because you are too weak to take what you want by force." Daniel set down his datapad and looked at each of the warriors in turn, before returning his attention to Vrextal. "Intelligence is a weapon," he said simply, "the most dangerous weapon in the universe." The warriors laughed, their clicking sounds echoing through the common area and drawing the attention of other species nearby. Pretty words from a creature that would not last 5 minutes in combat against a Corvathi child, Vrextal said. Perhaps we should test your theory about intelligence being a weapon. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What do you propose? Tomorrow, in the station's arena, Vrextal said, his voice rising so that everyone in the common area could hear. A demonstration of combat prowess between our species, witnessed by all who wish to attend. He spread his clawed appendages wide, unless your kind is too afraid to accept such a... Daniel understood immediately what was happening. This was not just about personal pride, it was about politics. If he refused the challenge, it would confirm the Corvathi belief that humans were cowards, and the negotiations would collapse entirely. Earth would lose any chance of establishing trade routes through this sector, and humanity's reputation among the galactic community would suffer a serious blow. But if he accepted, he would be facing a trained warrior who was larger, stronger, faster, and equipped with natural weapons that could tear through human flesh like paper. The odds were not good. Daniel stood slowly, rising to his full height, which still left him more than a foot shorter than the smallest of the Corvathi warriors. He looked Vrextal directly in the eyes, refusing to break contact, even as the alien's mandibles clicked with anticipation. I accept your challenge, Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent common area. Vrextal seemed genuinely surprised for a moment, before his expression shifted to something like eager excitement. Then tomorrow you will learn what it means to face a true predator, human, he said, and your species will learn its proper place in the galaxy. The warriors turned and walked away, already discussing among themselves how quickly the fight would end and how much the human would scream before dying. Daniel watched them go, his expression thoughtful. Around him, the other species in the common area whispered among themselves, most of them clearly expecting to witness a slaughter the following day. But Daniel was not thinking about the odds or the danger. He was thinking about his training, his experience, and all the times throughout human history when his species had faced impossible situations and found a way to survive. The Corvathi thought they knew what humans were capable of. They were wrong. And tomorrow, Daniel would show them exactly how wrong they were. The arena was packed with thousands of Corvathi, their clicking voices creating a deafening chorus that filled the massive circular structure from floor to ceiling. Word of the challenge had spread throughout the station overnight, and it seemed like every warrior, official, and curious civilian had come to witness what they expected would be a brief and bloody demonstration of Corvathi superiority. Daniel stood at the entrance to the arena floor, looking out at the sea of compound eyes that stared back at him with a mixture of contempt and hungry anticipation. The arena itself was about 200 meters across, with a floor made of smooth metal that had been scarred and dented by countless previous battles. High above, a viewing platform held the station's most important officials, including High Arbiter Zilketh, who watched the proceedings with obvious interest. Daniel wore simple clothing, loose pants, and a fitted shirt that allowed freedom of movement. He had no armor, no weapons, nothing but the body he had been born with and the mind that had been trained through decades of service. Across the arena, Vrextal emerged from the opposite entrance, and the crowd erupted in cheers and clicking sounds of approval. The young warrior raised his clawed appendages in triumph, playing to his audience as he strutted toward the center of the floor. His exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh arena lights, and Daniel could see that he had polished it for the occasion, wanting to look his best for his moment of glory. A Corvathi announcer stepped forward and began explaining the rules of the combat. Each participant would be allowed to select one tool from a weapons rack that had been placed at the edge of the arena. The fight would continue until one combatant yielded or was rendered unable to continue. Killing was permitted, but not required. Daniel walked to the weapons rack and examined his. There were various bladed weapons, blunt instruments, and even a few projectile devices, Vrextal had already made his selection. A traditional Corvathi warblade that was curved and serrated, designed to slice through armor and flesh with equal ease. The weapon was nearly as long as Daniel was tall, and Vrextal handled it with obvious skill. Daniel studied the rack for a long moment, aware that the crowd was growing impatient. Finally, he reached out and selected two items: a length of thin but strong cord about 3 meters long, and a small metal weight that was meant to be attached to a training weapon. The crowd fell silent for a moment before exploding into the loudest clicking laughter Daniel had heard since arriving on the station. Even Vrextal seemed confused, his antennae twitching as he tried to understand what possible use the human could have for such useless items. High Arbiter Zilketh rose from his viewing platform, his voice amplified to carry across the arena. The combat between Vrextal of the Warrior Caste and Daniel Hayes of Earth will now begin, he announced. May the strongest prevail. Vrextal did not wait for any further ceremony. He charged immediately, crossing the distance between them with terrifying speed. His blade arced through the air toward Daniel's midsection, a killing stroke that would have cut most opponents in half. But Daniel was not there. He had begun moving the instant Vrextal's muscles had tensed for the charge, reading the alien's body language with the practiced eye of a soldier who had spent years learning to predict enemy movements. He slid to the side, smooth and fluid, letting the blade pass within inches of his body. As Vrextal's momentum carried him forward, Daniel's cord whipped out in a blur of motion. The weight at the end wrapped around one of the warrior's rear legs, and a sharp pull at exactly the right moment sent the Corvathi stumbling. Vrextal caught himself before he fell, but the damage to his pride was done. The crowd had gone completely silent. Daniel did not press the advantage. Instead, he circled slowly, keeping his distance, studying his opponent's reactions. Vrextal's compound eyes tracked him with obvious confusion and growing anger. "Stand still and fight, coward," Vrextal snarled. Daniel did not respond. He just kept moving, staying just out of range, forcing Vrextal to turn constantly to keep him in sight. It was a simple tactic, one that humans had used against larger predators for millions of years. Keep moving, stay patient, wait for the perfect moment. Vrextal attacked again, and again Daniel evaded. But this time, as the warrior's blade swept past, Daniel stepped inside his guard and delivered a precise strike to the joint where Vrextal's upper arm connected to his thorax. It was a weak point in the exoskeleton, a small gap that allowed for movement, but also allowed for damage if one knew exactly where to hit. Vrextal hissed in pain and staggered back, his blade arm hanging slightly lower than before. The crowd murmured in disbelief. Daniel continued to circle, continued to wait. He was not trying to overpower his opponent, because he knew he could not match Corvathi's strength. Instead, he was doing what humans had always done when facing larger and stronger enemies. He was breaking them down piece by piece, strike by strike, until they could no longer fight. The battle continued for 20 minutes, far longer than anyone had expected. Vrextal attacked with increasing desperation, his movements becoming wilder and less controlled as frustration overwhelmed his training. Daniel dodged and weaved, landing precise blows to joints and nerve clusters whenever the opportunity presented itself, targeting vulnerable areas that he had identified through careful observation of Corvathi anatomy during his time on the station. His cord tangled Vrextal's legs twice more, each time throwing the warrior off balance and opening opportunities for more damaging strikes. Blood, or what passed for blood in Corvathi physiology, began to seep from several wounds in Vrextal's exoskeleton. His movements grew slower, his reactions more sluggish. Daniel remained calm throughout, his breathing steady, his focus absolute. This was what he had been trained for, what his entire species had evolved to do. Persistence hunting, the oldest and most effective predatory strategy on Earth. Humans did not need to be faster than their prey, or stronger than their prey. They just needed to keep going longer than their prey could survive. Finally, after one last desperate lunge that Daniel easily sidestepped, Vrextal collapsed. His legs gave out beneath him, too damaged by accumulated strikes to support his weight any longer. He tried to rise but could not, his body finally betraying him. The arena was completely silent as Daniel walked to stand over his fallen opponent. Vrextal looked up at him with compound eyes that reflected something Daniel had not seen in any Corvathi since arriving on the station. Fear. Yield, Daniel said quietly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, painfully, Vrextal spoke the word that the arena's acoustics carried to every listener in the massive structure. I yield. Daniel stepped back and offered no further comment. He had made his point. He turned to face High Arbiter Zilketh on the viewing platform, meeting the ancient Corvathi's gaze without flinching. The message was clear. Humans were not prey. They had never been prey, and any species that treated them as such would learn the truth the hard way. The silence in the arena lasted for what felt like an eternity. Thousands of Corvathi sat motionless, their compound eyes fixed on the impossible scene before them. A human, a soft and fragile creature from a species they had dismissed as insignificant, had just defeated one of their own warriors in single combat. Then the silence shattered. Warriors surged forward from the crowd, their voices rising in a cacophony of clicking sounds that expressed rage and disbelief and wounded pride. They demanded answers, challenged the result, called for the human's immediate death. Some claimed that Daniel must have cheated, that he had used hidden weapons or forbidden technology. Others simply wanted revenge for the humiliation their species had just suffered. Armed guards moved quickly to surround Daniel, their weapons raised and ready. He stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides, making no threatening movements. He knew that any sign of aggression would give them the excuse they needed to kill him. High Arbiter Zilketh's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Silence, the ancient Corvathi commanded, and his voice carried such authority that even the angriest warriors stopped in their tracks. The crowd fell quiet, though the tension remained thick enough to taste. Zilketh descended from his viewing platform, moving with the slow and deliberate pace of someone who had lived long enough to know that rushing accomplished nothing. The other officials followed behind him, and the guards parted to allow them through. The High Arbiter stopped directly in front of Daniel, close enough that Daniel could see his own reflection in those multifaceted eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Human, Zilketh said finally, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent arena. How did you do this? He gestured toward Vrextal, who was being helped off the arena floor by medical personnel, his body broken and his pride shattered. You have no claws, no armor, no venom, no natural weapons of any kind, Zilketh continued. By every measure we use to assess combat capability, you should be dead right now. Daniel took a deep breath and looked around at the assembled Corvathi. Thousands of eyes stared back at him, waiting for an answer that might explain the inexplicable. You look at humans and see soft skin, Daniel said, raising his voice so that everyone could hear. You see blunt teeth and weak muscles, and bodies that seem designed for nothing except being killed by creatures like yourselves. He paused, letting his words sink in. You see prey, he continued, and because you see prey, you assume that is what we are. He shook his head slowly. But you have made a fundamental error in your assessment, one that many species before you have made, and many species after you will probably make as well. Daniel began to walk in a slow circle, addressing the entire crowd rather than just the High Arbiter. Humans evolved on a planet that we call Earth, he said. By any objective standard, Earth is what galactic scientists would classify as a death world. He saw some of the Corvathi shift uncomfortably at that term. Death worlds were rare, planets where the conditions were so harsh and the competition for survival so intense that evolution produced species of exceptional danger. On Earth, the weather itself tries to kill you, Daniel continued. We have hurricanes that can flatten cities, earthquakes that swallow entire regions, volcanic eruptions that block out the sun for years. He gestured at his own body. We have diseases so small that you cannot see them without special equipment, yet they have killed more humans throughout our history than all our wars combined. And we have predators. Creators with claws and fangs and venom. Creatures that hunt in packs and ambush from shadows and attack without warning. He stopped walking and faced the crowd directly. Humans did not survive on this world because we were the strongest, or the fastest, or the most heavily armored, he said. We survived because we were the most adaptable, the most persistent, and the most creative species our planet has ever produced. Daniel held up his hand, showing his soft skin and blunt fingernails. This skin that you mock as weak can heal from wounds that would permanently disable your warriors, he explained. A Corvathi who loses a limb is crippled forever, but humans can recover from injuries that would kill most species. He tapped his chest. These weak muscles that you laugh at can maintain activity for hours, days, even weeks without rest. Human hunters on Earth used to chase prey animals until those animals literally dropped dead from exhaustion because no other creature on our planet could match our endurance. He touched his temple. And this small brain that you consider inferior developed the capacity to do things that no other species on Earth could do, he said. We learned to make tools, to create weapons, to plan strategies that looked years into the future. Daniel's voice grew stronger as he continued. We learned to track prey across continents, following them for days or weeks until they had nowhere left to run. We learned to set traps that caught animals while we slept, to build shelters that protected us from predators, to make fire that scared away the creatures that wanted to eat us. We learned to work together, to communicate, to pass knowledge from one generation to the next, so that each human born was stronger and smarter than the ones who came before. He spread his arms wide, addressing the entire arena. Our prey, because we do not look like predators, Daniel said. But the most dangerous predator does not need armor, or claws, or venom. The most dangerous predator needs only 3 things: patience, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to ever stop. He met High Arbiter Zilketh's gaze directly. We are persistence hunters, Daniel said. We do not chase down our prey in a single burst of speed, like some species do. We follow it, day after day, night after night, mile after mile, until it cannot run anymore. And then we finish it. The arena was absolutely silent. Daniel could see that his words were having an effect, could see the way the Corvathi were looking at him with new eyes. Your warrior was faster than me, Daniel acknowledged. He was stronger than me, better armed than me, better armored than me. But I did not need to be faster or stronger. I just needed to keep going longer than he could, and that is something humans have been doing for millions of years. He looked around the arena one final time. Every species that has underestimated humanity has learned this lesson, Daniel said. Some learned it through trade and friendship, by working with us and discovering what we could accomplish together. Others learned it through war, by trying to conquer us and discovering that humans do not surrender, do not give up, do not stop fighting until the fight is won. He turned back to Zilketh. The choice of how you learn this lesson is entirely yours, High Arbiter. You can treat us as partners and allies, and together our species can accomplish great things. Or you can treat us as enemies, and you will discover why every predator on Earth learned to fear the creatures that walked on 2 legs and never stopped coming. The High Arbiter was silent for a long moment, his antennae twitching as he processed everything he had just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all trace of the contempt it had held when Daniel first arrived on the station. "What are you, Commander Hayes?" Zilketh asked quietly. "What are humans really?" Daniel's answer was simple. "We are survivors, High Arbiter. We are the species that refuse to die, and we are just getting started." The trade negotiations resumed the following morning, but everything had changed. Daniel walked into the same chamber where he had faced contempt and mockery just days before. But now the atmosphere was completely different. The Corvathi officials who had laughed at him before now looked at him with something that resembled respect, or perhaps it was caution, or perhaps it was both. High Arbiter Zilkith sat at the head of the table, and when Daniel entered, the ancient Corvathi actually rose from his seat in a gesture of acknowledgement that had never been offered before. "Commander Hayes," Zilkith said, using Daniel's proper title for the first time since the negotiations began. "Please, be seated." Daniel took his place at the table and waited. He had learned that sometimes the best strategy was to let the other side speak first. Zilkith looked at his fellow officials for a moment, then turned back to Daniel. "The Corvathi Trade Council has reconsidered our position on several matters," the High Arbiter began. "We believe that a more equitable arrangement between our peoples would serve both our interests better than the terms we previously proposed." Daniel nodded, but remained silent. "We are prepared to offer shared mining rights in the territories we previously discussed," Zilketh continued. "Additionally, we would like to propose a technology exchange program that would allow both species to benefit from the other's advancements." He paused, his mandibles clicking slowly. "And we would like to discuss the possibility of a mutual defense pact," Zilketh added. "One that would bind our peoples together in times of conflict and ensure that neither stands alone against potential threats." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. This was everything Earth had hoped to achieve from these negotiations, and more. Just a few days ago, the Corvathi had been demanding that humanity give them everything, while receiving nothing in return. Now they were offering partnership and alliance. The power of a single demonstration, a single proof of what humans were capable of, had accomplished what months of diplomacy had failed to achieve. "I believe Earth would be very interested in discussing these proposals," Daniel replied. "I will need to consult with my government, of course, but I can say that what you are offering sounds like the foundation for a strong and lasting relationship between our peoples." The negotiations that followed were productive and fair. Both sides made compromises, both sides gained advantages, and by the end of the day, a preliminary agreement had been reached that would benefit humans and Corvathi alike. When the final documents were signed, Zilketh approached Daniel privately. "I have lived for more than 300 years, the High Arbiter said quietly. "Time. I have seen many species come and go. Some were strong and lasted for centuries. Others were weak and were conquered or destroyed." He looked at Daniel with an expression that might have been curiosity, or might have been something deeper. "I thought I knew where humans would fall on that spectrum," Zilketh admitted. "I was wrong." Daniel inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Underestimating us is a common mistake," he said. "We do not hold it against you." "Perhaps that is the most frightening thing about your species," Zilketh replied. "You do not hold grudges, you do not seek revenge, you simply move forward and achieve your goals regardless of what obstacles stand in your way." He was silent for a moment. "I think the Corvathi have been the dominant power in this sector for too long," Zilketh said finally. "We have grown comfortable, arrogant, blind to the potential of other species." "Meeting your kind has shown me that," he admitted. "We have been blind to the new possibilities. Meeting your species has forced us to reconsider everything." Daniel nodded. "Perhaps that is the most frightening thing about us," he said. "We learn, we adapt, we change." Zilketh paused again. I think we can learn from each other, he said. Perhaps this will be the beginning of a new era in this sector. Kind has reminded me that the galaxy is full of surprises, and that underestimating anyone is a dangerous habit. Daniel extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship and respect. After a brief hesitation, Zilketh extended one of his clawed appendages and allowed Daniel to grasp it. To a new understanding between our peoples, Daniel said. To a new understanding, Zilketh agreed. 2 days later, Daniel prepared to board the Wandering Star for the journey back to Earth. He had accomplished his mission and more, and he knew that the report he would deliver to the Terran Diplomatic Corps would change humanity's position in the galactic community forever. As he walked through the station toward the docking bay, he was surprised to find Vrextal waiting for him. The young warrior's injuries had been treated, but he still walked with a noticeable limp, and several of his limbs moved stiffly due to the damage Daniel had inflicted. Daniel tensed, wondering if this was some kind of revenge ambush. But Vrextal made no threatening moves. Instead, he simply stood there, his compound eyes fixed on Daniel, with an expression that was difficult to read. Human, Vrextal said, though this time the word carried no insult. I have a question for you before you leave. Daniel relaxed slightly and nodded. Ask your question. Vrextal was silent for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. In the arena, he said finally, you could have killed me. Your strikes were precise enough that I know you could have targeted vital areas instead of joints and nerve clusters. Why did you show mercy? Daniel considered the question for a moment before answering. Because killing you would have proven that humans are dangerous, he said. Sparing you proved that we are civilized. Both things are true, but the second is more important. Building peace. Vrextal's mandibles clicked slowly as he processed this. You think about victory in ways that we do not, he observed. I was trained to believe that the only true victory is the death of your enemy. But you achieved a greater victory by letting me live than you would have by killing me. Daniel nodded. We have had a very long time to practice thinking about these things, he replied. Thousands of years of war taught my species that the greatest victory is one where both sides walk away better than they started. Killing you would have created an enemy. Sparing you created an opportunity for understanding. Vrextal was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly and with obvious effort given his injuries, he extended one clawed appendage in what Daniel recognized as a formal gesture of respect between Corvathi warriors. Perhaps my people misjudged yours, Vrextal said. Perhaps we saw only what was on the surface and missed the truth that lay beneath. Daniel reached out and grasped the offered limb firmly. Perhaps, he agreed, but now you know better. And knowing better is the first step toward working together. Vrextal's mandibles spread in what might have been the Corvathi equivalent of a smile. I hope we meet again someday, human, he said, under better circumstances. So do I, Daniel replied, and when we do, perhaps you will simply call me Daniel. The Wandering Star departed from the station an hour later, its engines carrying Daniel Hayes back toward Earth and home. As the massive Corvathi structure shrank in the viewport, Daniel thought about everything that had happened during his mission. He thought about the contempt the Corvathi had shown when he first arrived, and the respect they had offered when he left. He thought about the ancient mistake that so many species made when they looked at humans and saw only soft skin and weak muscles. And he thought about all the challenges that lay ahead for humanity as they continued to explore the galaxy and encounter new species, new cultures, new opportunities, and new threats. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but it was also dangerous. There would be other species like the Corvathi, others who would underestimate humanity and learn the truth the hard way. There would be conflicts and struggles and times when everything seemed hopeless. But Daniel was not worried. because he knew the one truth that had carried his species from caves to the stars, from struggling survivors to galactic explorers. Humans did not give up. They did not surrender. They did not stop. No matter what challenges they faced, no matter what obstacles stood in their way, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, humans found a way to survive and thrive and succeed, together, as a species united. By their shared history and their unbreakable will, the stars were waiting, and humanity was ready. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else, with patience, with intelligence, and with an absolute refusal to ever stop moving forward.